apologize to patrons right now.
And Hangout is live. All right. Let's see how many people. Oh. Okay. We have 7 people. Oh, I'm going to have to mute this. This is going to get in.
Trial and error. All right. 7. That's 7 more than 0.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me try
Yeah,
to figure out how to...
I usually go to the YouTube channel and I'll mute it.
Yeah, I've got it.
I'm here now. We can start.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh,
Thanks for showing up, guys.
Oh, it's our pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
I wanted to start off with, I was going to, actually, I might as well just get into it now.
Why don't you introduce us?
Yeah, right now we have Amanda from Brief Brain Facts, and then Mrs. Snarky and Godless Iowan, who also have YouTube channels. If you guys aren't subscribed to them, which I assume that you probably are, you should do that. We should, I should probably make somebody a moderator. I'll make Aaron a moderator. Add moderator. Cool.
You got the power now, Aaron.
Yes, I do. So, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your origin stories?
Origin stories. Wow.
Yes.
Well, I'll just go first. My name is Amanda, and I'm here from. Well, I'm thinking about like calling my channel differently because I thought it was a cute Brief Brainstorms, but I'm just kind of playing with that name right now.
Oh yeah, I noticed that.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody else noticed, but yeah, so that's that. We just did a video together. You guys should check it out after the live stream on this channel here. It's about, well, we kind of tackled a few things: neuroplasticity, children, development, and stress, I think was the primary focus of that video. So you guys should check it out after this stream. I obviously have my own channel where I discuss the brain and behavior. I have I have graduated with a graduate degree, and my focus was in, I guess, behavioral neuroscience, where I did focus on audition or the auditory sense. So that's my origin story. Next.
and we're here because they needed people that weren't as intelligent.
What? Look, I've watched your guys' content. You guys are more than intelligent enough. Probably even more intelligent. I don't know.
I'm an accountant, so it's like
I'm a housewife. I studied psych and sociology, but I dropped out, so I don't know if that counts.
I think everything counts. I think everybody has their own cognitive capacities.
Definitely.
but we're both leftist lefterals. So
why don't you guys go a little bit more in depth into your origin stories? Like, think of it like a comic book, or like you're a superhero. What influenced you to become who you are today?
Well, my parents worked at a state school. They met each other. They didn't really like each other, but they had me anyway, and they stayed together, and it was abusive and it was awful. And then they divorced when I was about 13, and I've got a lot of PTSD. So I was really curious about that and some of the other mental health issues that my parents had. So I got into psychology and sociology, thinking I could help other abused kids and stuff like that. But I've always loved philosophy because it's really helped me cope with life. And I know that sounds weird, but because people think of philosophy as like this Uridic kind of school of, people twirling their mustaches, drinking Chablis and wearing monocles. But really, the way I see it is it's applied. It's something that you contemplate and you do introspection, and you learn how to cope with life and stuff. I mean, even like cognitive behavioral therapy came from the Stoics. So there's a lot of good stuff in there that I think people miss. So, I mean, that's kind of what my channel has been about lately. Also, in some of the silly things that I used to be into, like, oddly enough, astrology and occultism and crazy stuff. But yeah, I'm out of that now. And I kind of, for a while, was angry and debunking it. And now I'm moving on. So I don't know if that's a good enough origin story or not.
I think that was a great origin story. Actually, I was thinking about asking you if you were comfortable with telling us about that story you'd brought up about the trauma and the PTSD, specifically because it's very relevant to a lot of the topics that we covered in the last video about stress and brain development. And
yes, that's part of the reason why I'm excited to be here, is because I think it's important as someone who experiences that to comment on these things. So yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that.
And me, I'm the Godless Iowan, and I was a Pentecostal minister for about a decade, and got away from the ministry and got away from conservative politics, and became an atheist. Started an atheist YouTube channel. Now I don't really know what my channel is. It's kind of atheist, kind of leftist. It's more leftist than most atheists are comfortable with on YouTube.
Which is strange. I find that that's kind of a strange contingent with that group of individuals. You'd think that there would be more leftists among atheists.
You would think so, but no.
Yeah.
It's very strange that, like, okay, so a couple of years back, all the mega channels were right-wing. Or, well, they were I'm a liberal but channels. And yeah, basically there's a major follower mindset in that. So even if you don't follow that politics, you follow the creator. And yeah, it's been very strange realizing this since I've started talking about politics a little more over the last couple months, that a lot of my subscribers were like, you know, you were talking about social issues, but I didn't realize you were a leftist.
That's
it's very strange.
I probably won't ever get it. Did it have like a significant impact on your channel? Do you know?
A little. Like my growth has stagnated a little bit over the last month, but it's starting to pick up again. So now that people are realizing, okay, this is where he's going with this channel, and yeah,
I'm sure you'll probably end up picking up a lot more like-minded individuals if they find you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a YouTube channel that used to focus on more atheism, but being like more liberal based, at least more progressive. He's Secular Talk. You've heard of him, probably. Yep. Secular Talk and Kyle Kalinske. But now he barely talks about that. It's very political. So there's a big open space there if you tap into that audience. Mm-hmm. I always think, I always have to at least tell myself so that I don't quit that, I haven't found the audience yet. And maybe that's kind of the same thing, because you did see a lot more growth too, it seemed like, in a relatively fast time period. But I think, you got to find that pocket again, where those political atheists that are on the left spectrum are, because they are out there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you go according to the polling, then there are more leftists than there are right-wing. So it's really phenomenal to me that there's so many right-wing channels, and they're the more popular ones. So it's, whenever you're first becoming an atheist, it's kind of overwhelming. It's kind of like, well, where do I belong? Not here. Right. So yeah, for me, like, politics is more important than the God position. I mean, we have to deal with this every day.
And it influences all of our lives.
Yes, definitely.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I never really understand when people go, "Oh, well, I'm not political," or "Oh, I don't like to focus on politics," or "Oh, I don't like to think about it," because I'm like, I actually got on with an old not on, but I got onto a old high school friend of mine who basically said that, and I said, "You do realize that politics influences every aspect of your life. It determines the air you breathe. It determines the water you drink."
Yes.
You know what I mean? So you have to be in tune with it so that you aren't, just ingesting nonstop poison, or at least you're aware of it so that you can kind of take a stance against it. Because and they influence what is being taught to your children. So it matters. It matters so much. And people that are like, well, I just don't pay attention, or I'm so super disinterested in, I have no respect for.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion, especially when we have climate change, which is a real threat.
I think the apathy might come from maybe fear, or maybe the feeling of helplessness. Maybe you don't. The person doesn't feel like they have any control over those circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what he basically said. Is like, well, I can't change it anyways. And it's like, how many people think that way, and that's why, you do learn that you have very little effect of it, but in effect of things, especially if you are, as progressive as I am in a very red state. I'm sure you guys can relate to that. But you can't, that's the part of the problem, because if you're so apathetic in a very red state, how many of you guys how many more like you are there? You know what I mean? Because again, the younger generation, or at least my generation block, is a lot more liberal than conservative, but we get drowned out. And I feel like, we need to stop being drowned out.
Well, let's see, for me, I think like with the area of YouTube that I deal with, I think a lot of people, when they first leave their faith, they want to still keep a hold of some of the other biases that they have. So if their faith was anti-LGBTQ and the right wing is anti-LGBTQ, they just find themselves going that direction and going, okay, well, I'll just stay with that, and it's safer. It's more familiar. What they're used to.
Yeah.
But that's the easy way out, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Again, taking the easy route will not affect the change that you need, and the change we do. Society needs a huge shift right now in a lot of issues. Climate change, there's healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could do, but because you do see like a drowning out of us in these red states, that we don't get to, or we don't feel empowered, and we need to take that back, because they didn't earn that from me.
Yeah, well, the right wing both wings of politics do get lots of corporate funding, but the right much more so. So they're able to fund their campaigns a lot easier, and especially propaganda and think tanks and special interests. So there's a lot of that flooding our politics. It's saturated. So for me, that's why I have felt in the past that my voice and my vote and my opinions just didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to, if we really want to see change, we need to remedy that. We need to get the money out of politics.
I know a lot of the far left crowd, like the libertarian socialists like myself, are working mainly through like grassroots movements, building from the bottom up, and usually mainly doing activism, organizing, and trying to radicalize unions, and doing all that groundwork.
I mean, I can be a libertarian and also on the left.
Oh, a libertarian socialist? A libertarian is just is basically it originated on the left back during the French Revolution. Libertarian is just without a state. So libertarian socialist would be.
So it's like anarcho-socialism.
Yeah, it's basically just worker control. Workers own the means of production, and then it exists without a state. It's pretty much Noam Chomsky's philosophy, if you're familiar with Noam Chomsky.
It's syndicalism.
Yeah, anarcho-syndicalism. And then Also, Murray Bookchin, if you've heard of Murray Bookchin. He's a libertarian socialist. There's plenty of others. Then there's anarcho-communists, which is a very similar ideology, usually with a different form of praxis, but there's a lot of similarities. There's Peter Kropotkin, if you've heard of him. He's a scientist and philosopher from the early 1900s, early 18th or early 20th century. And then Mikhail Bakunin. There's a very long and storied history with a lot of the different anarchist ideologies throughout the past.
You're going to have to give me or provide me with a reading list because this is fascinating. Like I know Noam Chomsky, of course, but there's a lot of unfamiliar names in there.
Oh, another new one, not an old guy like Kropotkin or Bakunin, but David Graeber. He's becoming pretty popular now. Have you heard of him? He's the anthropologist who wrote the book on bullshit jobs.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
sounds familiar.
There's a big uprising of leftist anarchists that call back to the days of the Catalonian Revolution.
Yeah.
Oh.
What was I talking about the anthropologist the other day? On whose channel was I on when I was talking about them?
I think that was your channel. Or no, you're right. That was probably Godless.
I think it was, you.
Yeah.
Just anthropology, man. It's a good subject.
Definitely.
They get it.
And I do want to bring it back to the video that y'all made. It was amazing. And when I heard Robert Sapolsky, I was like, eee! I am absolutely a big fan of Sapolsky.
I love Sapolsky myself.
Mm-hmm.
He actually kind of cemented the idea of anarchism in my mind, due to the fact that like his work mainly centers around the fact that there's a lot of stress that comes from just the existence of hierarchies.
Yes,
and it can be detrimental. There's another. I wrote it down because I made a list of talking points just in case we ran out of things to say, because this is supposed to be kind of like a conversational kind of thing and not like a really ordered or structured thing. But I did make a list just in case. And Michael Marmot, he was another researcher who appeared in the film. What was it? Stress: A Portrait of a Killer with Robert Sapolsky, and he did the studies. He did the studies that were based on human beings. He was. I'm going to open up the Wikipedia page real quick. He did the socioeconomic studies concerning the psychological effects of people in hierarchical structures.
Definitely. I mean, I could see a lot of stress being caused by the hierarchy. I mean, it's just kind of evident. And it seems like it would be common sense to just presuppose that. But I mean, yeah, definitely in the family unit, there's a lot of stress, especially if you have a very authoritarian style leader of the group. For the family unit, because wow, like my dad was, you're not allowed to eat cheese, you're not allowed to drink milk, you're not allowed to go anywhere, you can't go to public school because there's black people there.
What?
Yes. I mean, the environment that I was raised in was crazy. Just absolutely nuts.
Yeah, I was raised in a fairly, like, my parents weren't. My grandparents were very racist. My grandfather would throw food away if he thought a black person had prepared it.
Wow.
It was ridiculous. And so like I almost feel good that I experienced that, because I always thought that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like even as young as I can remember it, I was like, that's not right. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I feel the same way, like, because I went kindergarten and first grade, and my dad picked me up from school, and he saw that I was holding this girl's hand. Her name was Tiffany, and she was my friend, you know? He didn't like that because she was African American, and I was just like, wow. So I was homeschooled for a long time.
And it's interesting how these kinds of behaviors. A lot of people assume that it doesn't exist anymore, but it obviously does in a lot of aspects, especially kind of the lasting ramifications of them. Like one of the things that I mentioned almost in passing during the video was redlining. Are any of you familiar with redlining?
Yes.
Yeah, but can I read Quality Tester's message? He said that my parents were racist and also black. I wasn't allowed to play with the neighborhood black children.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I mean, there is a lot of, within the black community, you will at times find a lot of kind of self-hate. You know, especially, you know, if you kind of fall into those, what they would consider to be stereotypical tropes, and even jobs, you know, like, you know, that should be below, you know, black people at this point. But if, you know, you are in the kitchen cooking, then they have a lot of hate towards that. And if you quote unquote, you know, act like, you know, a child or anything like that, just any of those stereotypical ways, there's just a lot of self-hate. And there's also, it's kind of weird. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the colorization issue in the black community, where lighter skinned people will also be on the receiving end of a lot of hate too.
Yes, definitely.
Or lighter skinned blacks, because, you know, they're considered quote unquote the house, you know, N-word.
Yeah.
Because they would get special treatment from white families during the times of slavery. They would be able to go into white spaces a lot more easily. And so, you know, I was on the receiving end of that hate. And then there's also the reverse. There's a lot of hate towards really, really, really dark-skinned people as well. Like, you know, I don't know if you guys ever heard of the phrase, they're so black, they're purple.
No, actually, I haven't heard.
I can't.
Yeah.
Phrase at all.
I'm from Texas. I've heard that.
Yeah. And that's a thing that black people say to each other as a way to colorize it and to say what's an appropriate colorization or not. It's weird, but what it does say is how much the overarching white supremacy has, and how much power it still has in so many different communities, even if there's like, you know, the idea of equality or whatever people may be under the assumption. It's obviously still there. Otherwise, colorization wouldn't be an issue.
And the
Definitely.
experience internalizes the kind of the self-hatred in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you know, for when I was studying sociology, I studied poverty and race and things like that, ethnic studies, and for the majority of people who are not white, they tend to live in poverty. And when you live in poverty, you are just saturated in the stress.
Yeah.
Like I've lived in poverty. Like it's hard.
Yeah.
Just trying to survive and making ends meet. And there's no way, like even for me, I realized that, you know, I have a privilege because I was able to get management positions and things like that, whereas my coworkers couldn't. And I don't know if it was on the basis of skin color or what, but I mean, there's still a lot of these institutional prejudices out there that keep people, quote unquote, in their place.
Mm-hmm.
And it bothers me. It bothers me a lot. And people, all this denial and stuff like that is just not good. And it makes me wonder about the ramifications of, because there have been a lot of studies that show that trauma and stuff like that can get passed down, and it's kind of generation to generation kind of thing. And if you're staying in it, I wonder, just what the difference is. I bet there's a major difference in how you're able to, what kind of quality of life you have in terms of memory, you know, cognition, and just enjoying life in general.
I mean, from the neuroscientific point of view, the case is settled. Poverty is bad. Generational poverty is bad, and generational poverty means that you do get stuck in a cycle, and that tends to be you're stuck. And it's not the poverty in and of itself that's passed down; it's all the deficits that could arise from the initial insult. And so I think I did no, there's no thinking about it. I did do an episode about this on my channel about poverty in the brain.
I watched that. It's actually, I love that video. I posted it, I shared it on Twitter after I watched it.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. Sharing is caring. But sorry. But I mean, the science is settled. It's so bad. It is so bad for you. It is so bad for your brain, and there are epigenetic changes that can occur, which ends up getting translated to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. It's made worse when you have no resources to help. If you don't infuse a community with all these resources like we should be doing, whether it's like real good educational resources, health resources, you know, any type of aftercare programs to help make sure that working families aren't separated from their, you know, if they are at work after school lets out, so that kids have a place to go, as opposed to just going home or getting into quote unquote trouble. You know, if you don't do those things, it is made worse, and that perpetuates, and it's bad. I mean, it's settled. It's done. Well, like the consensus there is done.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the science behind the need for reparations?
Yeah, that's the case for reparations. Now it's kind of, you know, people are always like, well, what does that mean? Here's the thing about reparations. I think that we do need to start with the House bill. There's a bill in the House. I don't remember which one it is. John Conyers, he also did create the HR 676, which is the House version of Medicare for All bill. He also was an author for that one, but he did do a reparations bill, and it is to basically design a committee to HR 40. Thank you. Quality Tester said it's HR 40. He did create a bill that would design a committee or set up a committee to determine what reparations are, what they should look like, and how it could be done. And that's, you know, basics. I think that's really the first start to figure out what it is and what it should look like, because there is a debt that needs to be paid. The United States profited severely off of slave labor. They did. And, you know, when cotton became really big for textiles, the United States, because all the other countries, all the Western countries had at that point outlawed slavery, except for the US. And so the United States became a world financial power at that point because of it. And again, nothing was provided for former slaves. And those that did provide resources, you know, whether they, you know, released their slaves upon death, or their own death, like it was in their will, or, you know, during Reconstruction, after the Civil War, if they did provide them with land, a lot of the times people would take it, steal it from them.
Yeah.
You know, whites would steal it from them because they didn't want blacks to have that kind of control and power. And so they were made destitute intentionally to make sure that they stayed as unearthed. So anyways, there's a huge debt that needs to be paid, is my point. And we don't need to carry that. You know what I mean? Like, why right.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You're fine.
I was just going to say we also need to make changes in terms of loan policies and things in regard to the housing market, because there's still a lot of segregation and there's not a lot of room to move.
Yeah, and that gets into the redlining issue, I think, that
yeah.
you're trying to bring up.
Well, and the key with that I was bringing up with the reparations issue is that a lot of people will look at it and say, well, you're just throwing money at an issue. How does that make things better? But you're trying to break a cycle, because there's a culture of poverty on both white and black people have a culture of poverty. And with African Americans, it is much harder for them to break free of that because they don't have the opportunities and the privilege that, like, I mean, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And like, I got some stigma from my family for doing it, but it was fairly easy for me to do that. But those opportunities aren't there if every single generation before you has been poor and you've been raised in that. Your mother was raised in that, your grandparents were raised in that, and that was just the norm.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it was kind of a similar situation with my family too. I think I was kind of the first one to go to college. I mean, my grandpa went briefly and my mom went briefly, but then they didn't stay for very long. But
I was just having this discussion the other day, and I think this kind of relates to what you're saying with school and resources is, like, Black people, right? They get stuck in poverty, and it is cyclical just because of our society and white supremacy and all those things. But again, a lot of people, if they go through a financial hardship, like with white people, they tend to, well, I may be poor, but at least I have a family that is a doctor. They can help get me my medicines or something along those lines. Whereas Black people, they don't really have those people.
Yeah.
Like, they might have a great community that'll help, try to bring them food or something along those lines. And it's more of like proximal comfort than it is any type of financial or substance comfort, or at least being able to come in and help with resources that you may or may not have. But whites tend to know some family member, maybe it's a cousin that's 3 times removed, but they'll have somebody in their family or in their friend group that can help, whereas, again, Black people don't have those same type of people around them, unfortunately. I mean, it's sad, and it's really sad. And this gives me to, like, the redlining issue, right? Because this has, I think, God, I just read this huge article about this. And it was super fascinating because it also showed how redlining was still very much a thing during the financial crisis. And also how Blacks were targeted with those pre-prime mortgage loans.
Yes.
They were the ones that were hit hardest by the financial crash. And I mean, oh my goodness, it's horrible. And the redlining is real, and it's really hard. And it's been
happening for a long time too.
Oh my God, it's been happening since Reconstruction. I mean, it's been happening so long. The federal government didn't help. That's my dog. The federal government didn't help at all. Thank you, subprime mortgages, not pre-prime. But because they used to have a thing where they would only insure houses that had, like, certain qualities to them or were in certain neighborhoods. And so loans were only afforded to those houses, right? And they were never Black-centered neighborhoods. And so Black people were targeted with loans that were on a personal nature. So somebody would come in, buy the neighborhood houses, and then offer a loan to Blacks. And then they would make it almost, markedly unaffordable for them, so that they could not only make a profit off the house, but also make a profit off of their quote unquote renters. And it would hurl Blacks back into poverty, even though that they were doing everything right, pulling themselves out, up by their bootstraps that they don't have. And they were considered middle class, but they were still only able to get houses in certain neighborhoods because they weren't able to get the other loans.
I think what's interesting is that it wasn't, the loans were probably one of the biggest parts, but it wasn't only that, but like businesses in those areas would raise prices of the goods, and they'd also suffer things like denial of healthcare and retail services, like supermarkets. Like supermarkets would deny service, or they'd move far away, and
and now you have food deserts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's still seen today. I mean, you can still see that.
That's awful. It's just...
And because blacks while they were allowed to move into white neighborhoods, but then they quote unquote weren't allowed because the realtor wouldn't tell them the house was available or something along those lines. They often, even if they were quote unquote middle class, they still were only able to get homes in ghetto areas. Still, even though they were middle class. And I mean, this is it's so awful.
Yeah, it's disgusting. It really is. And when I was watching the video of the children in the camps, the ICE camps, and I just I just can't even. Why? Like, why is this happening? Is it
because there's a lot of hateful people?
Yeah.
I feel like so helpless, though. Like, I feel like I can't do anything about it. Like, I so desperately want to do something, but I feel like I can't. I feel like there's no going back, you know? I don't know.
I just hate it when and maybe you guys don't, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they're like these detention centers with these children, these migrant children, and they'll be like, well, Obama had that.
No.
I'm like, first of all, he did have but his administration did have not these camps, but did establish centers for migrant children to go to because they were crossing the border by themselves.
Yeah.
And he would assure, like, not he, but his administration would find a family member in the States that would be responsible for them, for the children, and release it to their custody once they were able to find them.
Yeah.
But where it isn't the same is if they're crossing with a family member, he would not separate them from their parent or guardian. That just isn't something that he did. And now there's thousands of children that they've already deported the parent and have no fucking clue where they are.
Oh, yeah.
And so these kids are in custody here indefinitely because we can't locate the parent. How is this not, like, I don't understand how this is a human rights crisis at this point. Yet all of the other countries in the world aren't saying shit about it.
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand it. Why is this being allowed to happen? And with considering all the reports of sexual assaults and all the different things like that, it baffles me.
We need to get angry.
We are angry, and we're so mad about it. And I'm livid, and I have brought this up so much to people about these camps because it is not okay. It is so wrong. It is a human rights violation issue. The United States does need to be punished for it. They do need to have sanctions put onto us because this is not okay. But nobody's going to fucking stand up to the U.S. and they need to grow a pair because this will not get resolved until that happens, until there's an international outcry about it, until we actually are threatened with that shit because it's not going to stop because there's nothing that, like, we're trying, the people don't like it. The majority of voters don't approve of this. Yeah. Yet it's still happening.
Yeah. And this is ruining people's life. We're talking about human beings here. We're talking about human beings that were children that were separated from their parents. They're so traumatized that they're not speaking.
Right.
Many of them.
They don't even, like, some of them that were reunited, they don't recognize their fucking parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys let me interrupt real quick, Quality Tester says Chairman Amanda is my president.
Yes.
Sense, because this is how it started back in Germany, you know, back pre-World War II. The international community saw signs like what's going on now, but said Jack, didn't do anything, and let it build. Why if you know history, it wasn't that long ago, why if you know the precedents here, could you not try to get in front of it? So did you say like, hey, wait a minute, whoa, hold up? It's because nobody wants to make that comparison, right?
Yeah, you can't make the comparison, because then you get people that will say what's the fallacy?
Godwin's law.
Yeah, Godwin's law, that you're comparing everything to the Nazis. But you know
what, like, I'm going to compare to the Nazis? Nazi behavior.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have people that, like, Trump could walk down the street in full Nazi regalia and read Mein Kampf from he couldn't read Mein Kampf. I'm not going to kid you, but he could try to read Mein Kampf from a podium, and people would still be going, no, he's okay. See, he's not like the Nazis.
He already quoted Mussolini, and now we got senators quoting Mussolini.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell is going on? Don't we does nobody recognize that fascism is growing in America? Like,
it's because fascism has always been here.
True.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I say, like, people are upset that, you know, people on the left aren't really out on the streets, you know, burning shit down like they are in France and things like that. I'm like, you guys don't understand. Fascism was built here. The United States built their country on subjugating an entire people group.
Well, and
it's built and it's infused in our bones.
Yeah.
Like what Quality Tester said, not just Nazi Germany, but Hitler himself took a lot of inspiration from the eugenics program in the U.S. and Jim Crow laws. And it was America's sentiments towards the Jews that made Hitler comfortable knowing that we wouldn't step in.
Yeah. And he was right for the most part, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
it was years before we actually stepped in.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's built here. It was built here. And people forget that, or they don't know it. And so our laws are designed to protect a certain people group and subjugate another. Yeah. And that's why, you know, being poor in the United States is such a bad thing to be. One of the worst things you could ever do as far as criminality is concerned is go up against a cop, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like one of the worst things you can do, because if anything, they'll say you were resisting arrest, even though they had no reason to approach you in the first place. Yeah. And it's so normalized here. That's a normalized behavior. And so it's in our laws. It's done. And it drives me nuts, but there's your reason. That's why people on the left, because they know they're going to get their head bashed in. Like, so, that's a thing that people, you know, if they videotape that in France and their cops are doing, people are outraged by it. You do it here and people are like, oh, well, what'd they do?
Oh, they were in the street. Yeah. You should run them over. They're making laws that you could run protesters over and stuff.
Exactly.
Or at least they were attempting to. I don't know if they actually implemented it, but
just today there was a court that decided they weren't going to hear a case. And I can't remember all the details, because it was an African-American man that had a cell phone in his hand.
Yeah.
And they said the cops took the cell phone turning on as a gun flash. And that was their reasoning, that they had an objective right to respond. And it's like, wait a second.
That's a stretch.
Yeah. My sister
sure
is a cop, and she went through training, you know, and they did a simulation training. And out of the 50 recruits, she was the only one that didn't shoot the unarmed person in the simulation. And, you know, I asked her, because she told me about that. And I said, why? Well, you know, why is it that you didn't shoot? She said, because I'd rather get shot than make the mistake of shooting someone unarmed.
Wow.
I'm like, those are the fucking cops you need, not the ones we have.
Right.
Not the other 49 that shot, right?
Yeah. My dad was a cop for 20 years, and he only drew his weapon twice and never fired on a person once. Yeah. So I have a lot of respect for my dad, but I see videos all the time that they don't make cops look good. Like, and the thing is, they'll say it's just a few bad apples.
Yeah.
Well, a few bad apples spoils the bunch. That's the full.
Yeah.
And if you go and protect them, right, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, oh, well, it's just a few of the bad apples, I'm like, well, why the fuck do the bad apples still have a goddamn job?
Right?
Exactly.
It's like in Texas, well, back in the 80s, early 90s, my cousin was sheriff, and like there were a lot of people in the sheriff's department who were in the KKK.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a small town, so like we knew everybody, so we knew who these KKK people were, and they worked for the cops. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, there's a huge history between like white supremacy and white supremacist groups and being in law enforcement. It's because they used to be the law enforcement, especially in the South, you know.
And you also have to analyze their systemic position, the police's systemic position in society since their first, I guess, institution that essentially they came to be as a response to workers' movements and protests, and I think what it was is that they started out as private, apparently like a almost.
Are you talking about what is that? Those people, they start with a P. God, what is their name? They used to like, yeah, they were private security.
Yeah, private security detail for industry, essentially for the capitalists in the early 1800s.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. They start with a P.
Pinkertons.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yes, the Pinkertons.
So,
yeah.
So from the beginning, they were essentially there to basically stifle workers' movements and to maintain maintain stratification in the systemic hierarchy, so that the industrial capitalists could continue exploiting the workers without having to worry about them striking and rising up. And then, of course, like the role has changed in society for the police as time has gone on, but there's still there's still that element of the fact that they work for who pays them, who funds them, and so they still to this day are used to suppress protests and uprisings. And
well, and just remember, like, our laws were designed for this. They were designed to protect a certain class of people, and those tend to be the wealthy people, whether or not they're tax funded or not. It's again, it's part of the way the law was built or is built.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people do have issues with the judicial system, right? Because it's like they know that there isn't any true justice in the U.S. Because as long as you're maintaining a certain hierarchy that supports a certain class of people, which our laws are designed to do, then again, there is never going to be an idea of true judicial justice.
I think you had it right the first time with doo-doo. I mean, that's what the laws are, pretty much.
Well, I didn't want to sound, come off sounding, so I was like, designed to do.
It was perfect. But yeah, the entire structure comes from a time when it was just blatantly racist and blatantly segregated, not just by ethnicity or race, but also class. You couldn't even vote in this country if you weren't a white guy that owned property.
Yep.
So if you didn't have any means of production, then you were basically worthless.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's still that way today, really.
A lot of my feelings about the judicial system were changed when I was a prison guard for about a year, and I saw a lot of disparity among the people that were there. We had one inmate that was in his late 60s, and his crime, you could look at his called a report card, but it was just his card that said what he did. He stole a TV and got a life sentence for it in the 1960s. Yeah.
Mm.
The 1960s in Texas, stealing a TV got you a life sentence.
That's
not if you're white, though.
absurd.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, he was
Did
African
nobody
American.
look at his?
He had gone up for parole numerous times and was denied. And the bad thing about prison is once you get in there, you're forced to sometimes make decisions that end up getting you more time.
Yeah.
So if you get in a fight or anything, which ultimately happens, you're going to end up with more time.
They don't even.
Yeah.
They
the
don't
prison
even.
system is designed to keep you there.
Yeah.
That's why it was built in the first place. Essentially,
Especially since
it
been privatized.
was for that free labor.
Yeah, the privatization makes it way worse. And in Texas, they don't have. It's extremely hot, and they don't have air conditioning in the prisons. And I know you're familiar with this phenomenon that if it's really hot, people get aggressive.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it's a ticking time bomb,
Mm-hmm.
and overpopulated ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much work to be done.
Yeah.
I just sometimes that does get overwhelming to me. Like,
and if you want to go with slavery, if you see public grounds in Texas that look nice, an offender did that. They use their inmate service and in all public works.
Yeah. It's
and
de
they don't
facto
get
slavery.
paid.
It's
Like
de facto.
They don't get paid. Which most states, if you're an offender and you do some kind of work, you get at least some kind of pay. Not Texas.
Wow.
Nope. They're legit slaves down there.
And it's still constitutional.
Yeah.
Which is the terrible thing. Like, I guess a lot of people don't know that slavery wasn't fully abolished, because you could still have slaves as prisoners as slaves.
Yep.
And it's completely constitutional.
Hey, Aaron posted, I only ever see Amanda's science side, so when she goes into politics, it's like, holy wow, that's even more smart happening.
So true. I agree.
I talk about politics all the time. I'm sure people are like, "Oh, can you just stop?"
Actually, from what I've read in the chat, they seem to be enjoying the politics discussion.
Definitely, this is a well-informed chat, y'all. They've been on point.
Yeah.
Yes, and Amanda should totally start a second channel, just politics.
Yeah.
I'll have to have you guys on like all the time. So.
Yes.
I'd love to.
Hell yeah.
Keep up the conversation.
I'm cool with that.
Last time we were talking about slavery in the prison system. Today we're going to address something else. I don't know. I'll think of it.
I honestly find it kind of sad that you guys are so far away from me. We can't work together in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is something that sucks about YouTube. But I mean, it's great because we can still get together like this. But
yeah, we're also in the middle of nowhere. Like, we're in the flyover country.
Like, just think of how futuristic this is. Like, if this was 1990, and you would be like, you know what, in 30 years you're going to be on a screen with people all around the world. Like, that's the future. Yes.
You need to be working on projects with people that you'll never see in person.
Yes.
unless it's like VidCon or something. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe
we
if I
may all go up there someday, one day.
Yeah.
that means to you guys that are in the chat or watching right now, make sure you share our videos with family and friends, because we do all work really hard on them, and they need to be shown to the world.
Oh, I finally got my first patron, which I'm kind of happy about. It's the person goes by the handle X Hunter X Dick Riding Association 2011, a very funny name. But my first, I was kind of hoping that they'd be there and be here in the chat so I could shout them out. But yeah, so
I think your audio your audio just cut out.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can still hear me, right?
Well, right now I can.
Yeah, it just cut out for a second.
Cut out for a second. Okay.
Yeah,
so which part did you miss?
I heard Hunter X Hunter Dick Riding Association, and you were hoping that they would be in the chat.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah, I was going to give them a shout out, but anyway, so yeah, my first patron. If anybody else, I guess, if anybody else feels that my content is interesting, hopefully you guys can check out my Patreon as well. I'm not going to force anybody, of course, but it's there. The link is usually underneath all my videos. Actually, I might as well.
Speaking of Patreon, make sure you go hit his Patreon page up if you are able to, or share that with family and friends as well. But I recently had a thing where I asked my patrons, because patrons I think are like super fans, or they really like your work, or anything like that. I recently asked them, what's something that I constantly say about the limbic system? And I said the blank and blank limbic system, because I say this every time I mention it, and like nobody got it. And then I had to like repost and then post a video that says it. And like the emotional and impulsive limbic system, I say it all the time. Anyways, they did get it after I posted a video. But Godless Iowan, you didn't answer again.
I failed. I know.
You did.
I failed.
But you were the first person to respond, so I think that should be rewarded in some way. Yeah.
But knowing I failed.
I kind of wanted to ask you, I'm sorry for interrupting. I kind of wanted to ask you what made you take that giant leap from going from Pentecostal minister to your current ideological system today.
That is a long story. I've actually detailed it all on my channel. Basically, it started with my cousin committing suicide. And I was the minister at the time, so I had to prepare a sermon for my church the next Sunday, and most of the people in the church were family members. And I walked into the church that Sunday, and the first thing I heard was people talking about how sad it was that my cousin was in hell because he had committed suicide. And that just kind of clicked something in my brain and said, no, this isn't right. But it still took several years for me to fully break free of my religious mindset. A lot of little things along the way, just like after that, I decided, okay, you know what? I realized that I wasn't as faithful, and I was like, I'm gonna really seriously get into the Bible, and it is going to strengthen my faith, and I'm gonna understand it better than I ever have. And so I started reading the Bible, and I got to Noah, and I was like, this is just full of shit. There's nothing, there's no way any of this happened, and it's a poorly written book. It's like, this is a book
Not
that
even
was
a good book.
I know, it's a book that is, if you actually try to read it and understand it, you go, okay, this was written by men for men, and that's it.
Yeah. And
because you don't get very far in before they're like, okay, it's cool to sell your daughters. Your men are going to be your sons. They're going to take care of you. But if you have a couple extra daughters and you need some money, sell them off. And just all kinds of awfulness. And so my journey to get back into the faith and strengthen it ended up destroying it. And so what got me here was YouTube. I don't know if you guys know Holy Kool-Aid.
Holy Kool-Aid. I need to check them out.
Holy Kool-Aid's another YouTube content creator. They made a video called The Atheist State of the Union. And it was basically about how a lot of the larger, which were the vitriolic atheist content creators, had kind of left, and that there was plenty of room for new content creators. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get into YouTube. And then I got into YouTube and realized, you know, it's fun to make a funny response video, but at the same time, there's a lot of other issues that I enjoy talking about. And so I started streaming about those issues. And that kind of got me to where I am now.
So what made them leave the more right-leaning atheists?
So it wasn't like a lot of them are still around, but they're not really considered atheist content creators anymore. Okay. And it's because it got to a point where the things that they were raging over were just simple things that people started realizing that they were just being outraged to be outraged
in order to get views or something.
Yeah. Like the Sargons and the TJ Kirks and those kind of people, that they were just raging over stuff that made no sense. And people started, like, what I started to do was actually watch stuff from this is in 2011. There was a big atheist like schism on YouTube that occurred, and it occurred over a female atheist YouTube creator named Rebecca Watson that dared to say, if I'm at a professional event, don't hit on me. And that's all she did. And people went absolutely insane.
That really shows their colors then.
Yes. Yeah. Even like Richard Dawkins went against her.
Are you serious?
Yes. Wrote a editorial that I think it's called Dear Satima or something along those lines, where he's like writing a letter to a Muslim girl in Saudi Arabia and saying, don't worry about your issues. Yes, you could get beheaded, but women in America are getting hit on in elevators. And so they're the ones with the real issues.
Okay, so he's basically doing the false equivalency thing, but doing that to show how petty your issues are.
Yeah. Now, several years later, he did come out and say that he was sorry for that. But yeah, it caused this huge schism. Atheists basically ranked up in social justice warriors and anti-social justice warriors. And yeah, it was weird. But
and you know, a lot of the anti-SJW content creators, as I like to call them, because that's all they talk about, they don't have anything to offer in turn. I don't have anything I can learn from them.
It's so strange though, because they're saying that, you know, picking on quote unquote SJWs, right? When their little problem is another social issue.
Yes.
You know, everything that they're raging against is some social plight that they perceive. Whether it's the fact that they can't hit on women in a conference setting, or, you know, that's a social issue. Whether it is that, you know, white men aren't getting their dues anymore, that's a fucking social issue. You're just on a different side of it. You're being a social justice warrior too. You're just not doing it on the right side.
Yeah, the irony certainly is thick.
Well, and the biggest thing was you had certain content creators that wanted to do more. They didn't just want to be atheist content creators. They actually wanted to do something to better the world. And so there was this whole thing, Atheism Plus, where I'm an atheist, plus I care about human rights issues. And then you had the other side that said, no, we're just atheists.
Yeah,
And it's like, okay, be just atheist, but we're going to be over here doing this, and you don't, you can be an atheist, but we're not going to hang out with you because you're being awful.
Yeah, and these are the atheists that I don't want representing me. I don't want bigots representing me or speaking for me as an atheist. I don't think that it does any good in terms of normalizing atheism, which is what they say it's about.
Right. And so if they're saying, well, we should only focus on this one issue of atheism, well, it doesn't normalize it because it's too unidimensional. Yes. What makes somebody appear to be quote unquote normalized is that they are relatable, have other things going on, make them humanized is what I would consider normalized. If you humanize them.
And if you're just like, for me, I've had this conversation with several other atheist content creators. When you're sitting there and you're making a response video and you realize that you've just said the exact same thing that you said in the last video you made and in a video you made like 3 weeks ago, and you're like, this is so boring. I'm saying the same things over. I'm not doing anything. There are other issues that I can explore and talk about. And you start talking about those, and then you get people in your comment section, oh, you're just an SJW.
Yeah, they don't like you straying away from talking about atheism, but it's like, well, my atheism plays such a small role in my life. It really does. And it's not the thing I care about the most. Like, what I care about the most is human rights, the social justice, is trying to fix the system.
Right. And even trying to normalize atheism is a social justice issue too, because you don't want religious zealots telling you that you can't practice, you should have the freedom to practice a religion and the freedom to not practice a religion and not be penalized for that freedom that you're supposed to have. I just wanted to say Utah Outcast's comment points at himself or herself and says, "Proud ass social justice advocate."
Yep, that's also that's one of my friends. That's
X is awesome.
Yep.
Well, welcome X.
X is gonna give it to you. No,
and
I couldn't resist.
Quality Tester said he's a level 8 social justice warlord. I don't know what pronoun Quality Tester goes by, but says they're a level 8 social justice warlock.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's so strange because secularism itself, the separation of church and state, is a political issue. And just stating that can get you some of the most vitriolic hate in your comment section.
From atheists?
Yes.
Yeah,
from
definitely.
Atheists. It's so weird.
And if you try to talk about philosophy, that's another thing.
You're gonna have to explain that to me a little bit more about the why there would be pushback about that, because I think that's kind of the point.
I know.
For bringing atheism to light and saying that you're comfortable being an atheist.
Well, see, you don't understand because you're actually thinking. See,
the real issue is there are people that want to have atheist content creators that just make content to make fun of the theist. And that's all they want. And if you do anything outside of that, then you're challenging their own issues. So you have people out there atheists that are horrifically racist. And so you talk about race. I said one time in a live stream that white people who want to use the N-word in everyday conversations are just awful people. And I had other content creators going through my comment section using the N-word prolifically and had to ban them from my comment sections.
Holy cow.
It was
one of them is a very prominent one.
Yes, wow. It was ridiculous. But yeah, it challenges.
Is that like a guy that's also going to be like, but I'm not racist?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm not racist, but here's the N-word 30 billion times.
Because of my small bladder, I'm going to go to the bathroom again. I'll be right back.
Nature calls.
But no, it challenges their own beliefs, and they don't want to admit that they have beliefs.
So they want to be. I mean, but that's so. They had to make the active decision to be an atheist, right? Because of all the religion that's prolific in society, especially Christianity and all the institutions that uphold it. So they had to go through I just don't understand.
Once again, you'd think that, but you're using your thinky parts.
You're just too reasonable to understand.
See, they would say that atheism is the neutral position. So once you leave faith, you're an atheist. You haven't chosen to be an atheist. You're just an atheist because you left faith. And so they try to say that there's no belief system there. But they still have all the other belief systems that came with their former faith or with their own cognitive biases.
Right.
And so once you start talking about these issues and bringing them to light, it forces them to think about it, and they get angry.
Yeah, they do. And they definitely get angry. Like I was trying to point out, if you try to discuss philosophy and say that they're taking a philosophical position when they discuss atheism, they lose their shit. They completely lose their mind.
Yeah,
they just don't like philosophy.
They don't like philosophy. They don't like politics, but they engage in it, and it's just so ironic and hilarious to me.
I think a lot of people misunderstand the philosophical position. A lot of people misunderstand what the importance of philosophy is. Some people think that science has covered it all, but they don't realize that philosophy is just a different form of inquiry. It's more qualitative and based in abstract logic, and it has its own merit in sort of analysis and critical thinking. And also, science wouldn't be around if it wasn't for philosophy. Science blossomed out of logical systems developed by philosophy.
Thank you. Somebody finally gets it.
Yes. But it's so true. I mean, that's exactly where science came from, is from philosophical thought. And it used to be like considered to be a science.
Yeah, you would be amazed at how many people don't know and actually refuse to believe that that is the truth. And these are people that are supposedly... I know, right? Look at the history. These are people that are supposedly interested in the truth and critical thinking. Critical thinking, which is philosophy.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, because I was going to go on to another thought that I had in my head. So you keep going, and then I'll let you finish, and then I'll go into my other thought.
Oh, I forgot what I was ranting about this time. Oh my God. No, it's all good.
I was going to say to Beasativity that I actually got really angry people in my comment section when I said that atheism and theism are philosophical stances.
Yeah.
And people went nuts. Like, and that's what I said. All I said was, that's the origin of these terms. They were philosophical stances.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay.
So, all right. Beasativity, what you drinking there?
Oh, I am drinking a Big Wave, but in a giant mug.
I love that mug.
I was going to say at the beginning of the stream that because this is a philosophy stream, that an alcoholic beverage is required, but I didn't get to say that. So anyway,
I missed my opportunity to drink.
I did too. I had no idea. So I have a question for everybody, because we all kind of encompass our own space. Whether it's on the education spectrum or whatever. But there has been a movement, like the Me Too movement with women and things like that, basically standing up against sexism or genderism or things like that. And I read an article recently where it displayed kind of the proportion of men and women in fields like philosophy, neuroscience, and things like that. And the lowest, the lowest field that had specifically like PhDs, professors, and things like that in that field was philosophy. And I was wondering, I guess this is sensitivity, this is kind of a question for you, but do you see that as a problem, for one? And two, you know, how can your field go about kind of changing that to make it more inclusive? I guess this is an interview, but this isn't an interview, but it's an interview-like question.
Yeah,
but I was
definitely
curious.
think that it's a problem. Actually, like going through all the books that I have and the textbooks that I have, and it seems like it's predominantly white males. There's a philosophy of art book that I have where there's a few females and there's like a feminist perspective, but they're all white females, and you really have to go digging to find like the like, and it's all recent. Like there's a lot of older philosophers that are of other races. For example, Dubois, for example. But they aren't as what would you say? They aren't as predominant in a lot of the literature. They aren't as
well known, maybe.
So yeah, they don't have all that much exposure in the literature. But and there's a lot of recent philosophers that are people of color, but of course that like a lot of the a good deal of the literature is predominantly white male, but of course it's slowly changing over time. I think it's starting to diversify a bit as of late, but of course there's still a lot of work to go.
So is it more of a like an appeals process, like you have to kind of get your personally, but like the field of philosophy exists, and is a viable option for women, or is it kind of a multifaceted problem, and therefore needs a multifaceted approach, like more women professors maybe at universities, so that, you know, they can kind of appeal to more of a female audience and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a systemic problem, and it also has to do with there's nothing there for them to relate to. So like if there's not enough perspectives validating their experience in life, of course they're not going to be interested in pursuing it. And so like it really takes like it really takes dedication if the representation isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a long time the representation hasn't been there. And of course it disincentivized all sorts of people going like pursuing the subject, and of course, like, since predominantly white males are the authority in those fields, it, you know, that sort of patriarchal pressure can be felt, especially if you are a POC or a female.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
I was surprised.
Sorry.
I was surprised to see that that philosophy was the lowest proportion of females there, because I would have assumed it would have been religious studies. Religious studies was low too, just because of the nature of religions. A lot of them are patriarchal and do not allow women, or have not historically allowed women.
Well, and I think
for a very long time.
That's the same thing when it comes to philosophy. When you go with the couple of really big explosions in philosophy that stick out in my mind, when you're going with like ancient philosophy in Greece, or whether you're going with Renaissance, leading into the time of the revolutions in France and the US, access was a huge issue. And so you had to basically be a fairly affluent person in order to be able to take the time to read and to study philosophy, and women weren't given that opportunity. So throughout history, all of philosophical thought, except for a few small little people, not little people, but little spurts where women were allowed into the field. And generally it was because they were a wife of a prominent philosopher, that they actually got listened to.
Like Patricia Churchland.
Yes. But so yeah, it's basically philosophy up until the 20th century was almost all men. And so women had absolutely nothing to relate to.
Oh yeah.
Because it was all from the male perspective. It was all most of it is written in a very masculine sense. Related, a lot of ancient philosophy is related to war and preparing for battle.
Don't get me started on Nietzsche and the will to power.
Yes, and but there it does seem like the interesting thing for me has been the majority of men I've come in contact with that wanted to discuss philosophy were kind of the assholes. I study philosophy so that I can sound like an amazingly smart person. The people who actually wanted to have philosophical conversations were women. And so I think it's probably going to turn, but it just takes a long time to break apart that patriarchal culture. Much in the same way as we were talking about race earlier, it takes a long time to break that culture up and allow others into the field.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer a question real quick. Plantastic Life asked if I would consider Ayn Rand a philosopher, and let's just say that in academia, it's kind of a problematic aspect. She is primarily a novelist that attempted philosophy, and it does. And let's just say that it doesn't quite work.
I think
I mean, that's a really generous way to put it.
I think of like, okay, so have you read Candide and The Best of All Possible Worlds? I think Rand, her philosophy is the worst of all possible worlds.
It's true though.
Ayn Rand, where she fails is that it's not a critical thought. You know, it's not a critical assessment. And, you know, with her, because it is more, she is a novelist, or she was a novelist, and she used that skill and made philosophy dumb. And that's why people were so receptive to it, right? Because she dumbed it down, because she didn't apply it. like most philosophers would have. There was no critical thought. It was like, this type of bias is here, and that's the type of bias. I'm not even going to point out that there's bias anyways, right? I'm just going to say how it is and how we can quote unquote get the best world for me, for the people that think like me. And that's not philosophy. Philosophy, you actually consider multiple arguments, and you have to tell those arguments.
I was going to say, Quality Tester said, all right, friendship ended with beastativity. Now Aaron A is my best friend.
So back to the analysis of philosophy and whether or not it relates to women. Recently, I did a reading of Seneca's On Anger, and I did that with one of my friends who's female. And we got to this portion where he was basically comparing the unwise person or the fool to women and children. And that was just like, whoa, such a big red flag. And I think the reaction that she had wasn't, well, I'm going to look past this at the time. This is the way he looked at it. But it was so hyper focused on his view of women that the philosophy just didn't come through. And I think that's another major part of why at least some women might feel repelled from it, especially when you're talking about ancient philosophy and things like that, which Seneca was, around the time of Nero. So
and you have to read the ancient philosophy to get to the modern stuff.
Because the postmodern stuff is really, really complex, and you kind of have to have this foundation of the ancients and the moderns, and then able to even comprehend what they're talking about. So eventually, I'd like to get to like Baudrillard and stuff, but a
lot of it is derivative from previous philosophers. So like it's almost like a process of thought that you have to. It's built up on other frameworks of thought.
Definitely. And I wanted to start out with Stoicism because, for one, I think it's one of the more useful schools of philosophy, at least in daily life and trying to cope with shit. Because let's face it, living is very difficult. So, and plus, it's also very simple. It's easy to comprehend and to discuss, and I think it was a more relatable place to begin. So yeah, I mean, I didn't want to go with Plato because no. That's not easy. Like, okay, y'all, read the Republic. No. But
yes.
Yeah, there's definitely like those elements like that tend to repel people.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it's sad to me because I have always loved philosophy. And it's helped me get through a lot. And I did have another question in regard to the discussion with Ayn Rand and her being a novelist, and so she's not really a philosopher. What would your thoughts be on Albert Camus? Because he was a playwright.
Oh.
And
honestly, I'd be biased in this assessment because I love Camus.
Oh, me too. I consider myself an absurdist. Let's just put it that way.
He had close ties to a lot of philosophers of his time, and so he was well informed in that area. I think he was a philosopher in his own right. He was good friends with Sartre.
Yes,
of course. I think at some point they had kind of parted ways on certain certain potentialities. They were both libertarian socialists.
Yes, and I think the main reason, correct me if I'm wrong, that they parted ways was he didn't like the tactics that the Marxists were using at the time, and the USSR and all that. The use of violence and different things. I believe. I'm not.
Oh yeah,
sure.
it was wasn't it the gulags?
Yeah, the gulags and all the other tactics that they were using.
So
he didn't approve of that.
Yeah, so Sartre was hesitant to was hesitant to what's the word to decry or denounce the use of gulags or the USSR in general. Right. And Albert Camus was the first to say this is a complete travesty and it's a contradiction to our principles as libertarian socialists. So we shouldn't at all support the USSR in this extent.
Yeah. I think a lot had to do with the way he was raised, because he was in France-occupied Algeria, so he had quite a lot of life experience behind the repulsion that he felt for what was going on. So yeah, I adore Camus. He's one of my favorites. I have forced Godless Iowan to read The Myth of Sisyphus.
Oh, I had a book club, and I forced them to read The Myth of Sisyphus as well.
Awesome. More people should read it, I think.
Yeah.
I have not read that.
I thought it was pretty good, but I don't remember anything from it now.
All you have to do is imagine Sisyphus happy, and you're good.
Now I feel like so far behind on stuff that I'm like having to note in my head, make a mental note, like, okay, I need to go read this. I need to go read that. I need to go read this now.
I think you'd enjoy it. It's very short. It's a good read. He gets right to the point, which is one of the things that I really love about Camus. He's not like Stephen King, where it's like a big, thick book of him.
So he is very flowery in his language. So I mean, like, he's not technical. He's very poetic in a sense.
Yes.
So one thing that I think it's okay to dislike Ayn Rand, but like Camus, is that his name?
Yes.
And it's because if he still applied critical thought to his work, you know, maybe there isn't a bias there. Maybe there's a legitimate argument to be made that it was more critical than what you would ever receive from Ayn Rand, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, definitely.
That's very fair.
But I was just gonna say my very first jaunt into philosophy was Candide, and it was recommended to me by a professor who knew I knew absolutely nothing about philosophy and was like, "This is an easy read." So it's one of my favorite books now. Basically, it's this guy. I don't know if you've read Candide. Basically, a guy's raised in a kingdom that practices a philosophy in which they believe that this is the best of all possible worlds, and so everything that you see out here is good. Everything is good because it exists, and this kingdom is attacked, and Candide's love interest is stolen away, and he has to go on a journey to find her. And throughout this journey, he realizes that this world is pretty much shit, and he has to learn to exist and deal with life. So it's I think it's funny.
It is funny. There's a lot of stuff in there that's kind of like satirical about like his teacher Pangloss, was it?
Yes.
Professor Pangloss?
Yeah, Pangloss. And he meets a priest, and so this priest is a good and godly person, and he's like, oh, and then he has to kill the priest.
It's lovely. It really is. It's I think it's one of those books that everyone should read just for the lulls, really. I mean,
hey, I think I'm gonna Plantastic Life had asked, how have discoveries in neuroscience informed philosophy? I'm gonna answer this real quick. I think Amanda can help. Neuroscience has informed philosophy in a lot of aspects. For example, I just accidentally hit a button and now my computer's all messed up. Hold on. Okay, so it's helped because consciousness, free will, all those sorts of issues concerning the brain that have been debated in philosophy for a long time are starting to they're starting to be clarified within the field of neuroscience through experimentation and empirical evidence. So now we have a better idea, but we're not completely sure as of yet. It's still a work in progress. We have a better idea about the possibilities of what consciousness is and the role that it plays. We have a better idea about free will and how the brain works and how it interacts with our environment. So these questions aren't completely solved yet, but we're making a lot of significant progress in that sense because we have a better framework to work with, a better conceptual framework that makes it much easier to explore these questions.
And you're starting to see an infusion of neuroscience answering or attempting to answer a lot of questions in so many different fields, not just philosophy, not just sociology. I have it on my reading list right now because I saw an article that basically said how neuroscience is helping explain to archaeologists or find the reason that reading and writing emerged in archaeology and I guess archaeological history. And so it's getting infused in a lot of places because without our brains, definitely don't have humans and the way we are. And you don't have the systems that we've built or tried to build or imagined. And that can't exist without our brains.
Yeah.
That's the perception that I take. Now, somebody may go in and like, well, there was a divine intervention and blah, 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 blah. But I don't ascribe to that. I think that we made divinity emerge because, you know, I have a whole video on where religion came from in our brains, or at least why it may have emerged from our brains. But you'll see a lot of that in explanation in anthropology too. It's fascinating. And I love the interplay between different fields. And I think I was saying this on Scientist Mel's channel and maybe a little bit on Godless Iowan's channel as well, about how academia is has their hands tied a bit here when it comes to collaborative efforts across fields, because, you know, a lot of these journal articles have become so specialized in their own field where you want to get publishings that there isn't funding, or there isn't, and you're not incentivized to go cross fields and answer some questions. Like, I wouldn't, you know, if I had a lab that was established and I was working in my field of maybe audition and auditory neuroscience, I'd be stuck there. I wouldn't have been able to do a collaboration with Beasistivity here and talk about consciousness at all. I mean, I wouldn't have been incentivized to do so. And I think you're going to see a lot of problems with other academic fields in that regard as well. So I love to have the crosstalk, because it's kind of like the point, I think, of a lot of neuroscience is to have that. Because
a lot of inquiry in general, science, all the scientific fields, all the fields of inquiry, mathematics, philosophy, everything, there really needs to be a lot of interconnection between all of them, because I mean, this is a reality in its whole. We can't just we can't inspect parts of it. We can't analyze the properties of the ocean without acknowledging the water, in a sense. So I mean, we have to analyze how everything connects.
Right. And we also, like, this is going to get onto more philosophical terms too, but we also can't really, you know, do any of the analyzation without realizing that we are built for classifications. Why do we classify shit? You know, why are we why is that a need for us to do? Well, it helps us understand our external environment, but why do we classify things as they are? Why do we give meaning to certain classifications and not meaning to others? And I mean, that's a philosophical question that philosophers can hash out, I'm sure.
Another thing that kind of adds kind of ties into this too is the historical precedents, because correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't really have the phonetic alphabet like we have now until the Phoenicians, correct? So we had thousands of years where basically writing was just pictures or representations in picture form and not with sound. So you can see right there the neurological development and the change that took place in our brains and how it affected history. And I think it's you can't really get that awe-inspiring feeling unless you look back at the entirety of it and you realize the scope of the system that we have and the way it's developed. And to me, it's absolutely amazing. But people have this tendency to want to point to one thing and say, this is the answer, this is the cause. And then you don't have, it's not that simple. It's a system. So you don't have just one cause. It's all working together and building upon what's already there. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It is.
And that's why I'm a big advocate of inspecting it in more holistic terms and not trying to get so stuck in your way of thinking or isolated in your field.
Yes, agreed.
Yes.
I love that.
Speaking of going back and analyzing history and how cultures have evolved, there's something interesting that I read from David Graeber, the anthropologist we discussed earlier. I'm just re-emphasizing that for the new people in the chat. he was discussing how there was some anthropological evidence to show that like societies had in the past had kind of vacillated back and forth between egalitarian and stratified, depending on the circumstances, and that it wasn't exactly it wasn't like there wasn't a single specific system that was ingrained from the evidence that they had. I can't remember all the specific bits of evidence that he had provided off the top of my head.
Like based off
I remember
like resources and famines that may have occurred in the region. He used a lot of archaeological evidence.
Yeah, I think so. But he was talking about how depending on the time of the year, the necessity of the society, they vacillated back and forth between egalitarian organization and hierarchical organization, and that it never really it didn't solidify and codify, and as it did in our current society, how we've been in this hierarchical structure for so long that's had some devastating effects on the world around us. And before, like in the earlier human societies, they were flexible enough to be able to change the organization when it was necessary, and that egalitarian, horizontally organized societies were completely I guess what's the word,
self-sustaining?
Yeah, sustainable, I guess. They were like a valid form of organization that was that worked, essentially.
I mean, isn't that amazing? It just shows you how neuroplasticity works too, because our brains are adaptable. We are adaptable as a cultural phenomenon, those meme things, and we are adaptable as an individual, and our brains can adapt to the circumstance as needed. That's an amazing concept.
Yeah,
I don't think people realize how amazing that is.
It's very cool.
I noticed a question earlier. Where was it?
Is it the how have discoveries in neuroscience informed philosophy?
Oh no, we've answered that one.
Oh, we did, yes.
I think it was one about free will, maybe. Hold on. You guys can continue talking about whatever until I find the question.
We're intently waiting on you.
Yeah, you've built up this question now that we're like, it better be a good one though.
We need this question.
I remember. Yes. Okay, so I think Quality Tester was talking about what he. I began swung back to thinking free will doesn't amount to much. Okay, so. I think what's interesting about free will is that I think it's a very it's a multifaceted situation, but I think essentially it comes down to the inhibitory capacity of the frontal lobes. I think most of our behavior, from what we've noticed, from like studies done on the brain, is very much deterministic in a sense. But we managed to evolve this frontal lobe that was able to inhibit certain signals that allowed us to have more control over our behavior. And I think that is what we've kind of associated with free will in the past. And that's what and of course, before we understood about the functions of the frontal lobe, we kind of turned this concept of free will into something more than it actually was, which was just kind of limited adjustments of sort of decision making, I guess.
I think there's a lot of implications here. So if you think of free will in the deterministic view, right, that I would probably more likely to apply as far as like the inhibitory mechanisms of our frontal lobes to be able to, I guess, maybe prevent us from running just on impulse, prevent us acting out in absolute rage. But at the same time, what are the implications here? When we have a faulty frontal lobe, what does that lead to? Well, you're less inhibited, of course. People are a lot more aggressive when their frontal lobes aren't in check. And people can be violently aggressive and impulsive, right? And lead to violent crimes, for instance. And so people get really afraid of that discussion. Well, does that mean that they shouldn't be penalized for their actions at that point? Now, I'm not a criminal philosopher or anything like that. So what would be the way to approach that conversation so that you can kind of settle people down?
Like, for my mind on that, of course, we don't, even if you were to say the murderer had no free will, so we really can't hold it against them, you would still want to keep murderers away from the rest of society. But what it really would do, I think, is change the way we treat people in penitentiaries. And
also considering neuroplasticity as well, there's a possibility that whatever damage that was done to the frontal lobes could possibly be circumvented by the neural connections around it. If I'm right, Amanda?
If they do get the treatment that's appropriately applied. I think there's a lot of good evidence right now that's showing that meditation has some really great effects with that, as far as helping with the frontal lobe be a better moderator. But again, it's in its early stages, so there's really not a lot. It's not a widely distributed thing to do. It's not a treatment option for a lot of people.
I think that when it comes to crime, I think we're looking at it the wrong way. I think instead of looking at it as we should punish these people, we should actually rehabilitate people. And
yeah, that's what we're talking about.
That's kind of, I think, more the focus, where the focus needs to be. But it seems like in order to get that to become a thing, people have to change their minds.
Well, and that's the thing. People like to look, especially in the States, people like to look at the penitentiary system as a punishment.
And punitive,
so if you take away the punishment aspect of it and change it to rehabilitation, there's a lot of people that will say, well, then, people, there's no reason why they wouldn't commit these crimes if you're just going to rehabilitate them. But other countries have taken this on, and I can't remember if it's Sweden or Iceland, but
Sweden,
I think it's
penitentiaries are kind of along the lines of just another town.
Yeah.
And they're able to live. They're taught meditation techniques, and their medications are managed. But it's not a
good night, fantastic life. Sorry for interrupting.
No, you're fine. But if we take out free will, we have to learn that it's okay. It's going to be rehabilitation and trying to help these people not murder or commit crimes of any nature. And not just, we want to punish these people.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of work in the past like 20 years or so in terms of looking into conduct disorder in in children, and also antisocial disorder, which is not, I don't like people, but in the psychological sense of I don't care about the well-being of other human beings, or their right to autonomy, whatever. So I think that we're at least making progress, but I think that really what it boils down to is getting society behind it and getting people to the place where they're away from this eye for an eye bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's really what I keep seeing. Well, you know, people get outraged when they find out there's televisions in prison or that there's a prison that has Xboxes, you know, and it's like, why are you so mad about that? I don't know.
Well, that was the thing. Yeah, there was a prison that brought video games in, and they found that video games had a huge effect on lessening the amount of rage that was experienced, because they were able to use the video game and get their anger and aggression out through the video game. But people just thought it was the worst thing that we were giving these people fun and games, and
because people are so stupid.
Yes.
I mean, say it, but they don't really see the big picture. They don't see that. They don't care if it does help the guard's safety, for instance, right? Because it's more about punishing them and making people suffer than it is about anything else, than it is ever about anybody's safety or anything along those lines.
Also, it's about profit since the privatization.
True.
Yeah, but why is that able to happen in a society? Because we're a punitive society. That's how it's become a profitable industry, because we said, no, okay, yeah, that makes sense, because we hate people that commit crimes.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that they're punished as thoroughly as possible.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, this is why I like the Rawls veil of ignorance. Because anybody could be born with a brain that is inclined to commit crimes. You know, it could happen to anyone. And it wouldn't be with it, because you're basically cutting off the whole inhibitor. You
have to remember also kind of the definition of criminality, right? And what crimes are more acceptable in society over others. So white collar crimes are a lot more acceptable than like theft, than petty theft even, or big dollar theft. But white collar crimes, like being, you know, is much more acceptable than drugs and the crimes related to even being a drug user. You know, a drug user will get more for like a little bit of pot than somebody who crashed the entire economy.
Is it mandatory minimum offense or something like that?
Right. And while people from Wall Street get to and the bankers get out of jail free card, or get encouraged even. They get bailed out.
It's fucked up.
I know. Back to the Texas thing. In Texas, just a regular murder charge was 20 years to life with possibility of parole after 5. And and this is just nothing else added. Like we're just saying that's like the base charge. For a drug charge of a possession of over an ounce of weed, it was 15 years with no parole during that 15 years.
What?
So a 5-year difference between an ounce of weed and a murder charge.
Yes, but 5 years if you're there the whole time. If you got parole after 5, you could be in prison 10 years less on a murder charge than on a possession charge.
Wow.
Oh.
Marijuana was those charges for weed and were designed to put minorities in jail.
Yep.
You know, whereas anybody could kill, right?
Also,
on top of that, when you get weed crimes in jail, these are not violent offenders. These are offenders generally that you can use for your public works projects.
So they got this. They thought it through.
Yeah. Because you don't want to put a violent criminal out there on the street working on a pothole. You want to put a pothead working on the pothole.
I feel bad. I feel bad for laughing at that, but that was a funny joke.
It was sadly funny. It's because it's so true.
It's true.
You know?
Yeah.
It's so disheartening because it's like how I'm glad that people are starting to say that this is not okay, that this is not acceptable. Obama was supposed to do something about it.
No,
and he did kind of do something, but it wasn't enough.
On the subject of Obama, I feel like it's an interesting situation because apparently, from what I've read, he was much more radical before he went into office. And then when he went into office, he was pretty much just a neoliberal centrist, which I feel is very disappointing.
Oh yeah, you should feel disappointed. I think a lot of people were disappointed, but I mean, I recognize the type of challenges he had, not only like financially, like bowing down to financial industry, which is a whole nother subject in and of itself. But he did have a lot of racial stuff that Republicans and even people in his own party that would use against him, and saying like, well, you can't give blacks anything, you can't help with their sentencing laws or the unfair sentencing with crack cocaine and cocaine. So he had to compromise on that because he couldn't make it the appearance of him giving any favors to black people.
Yeah.
Which is so ridiculous because nobody ever says, like, what about all the favors you're giving to white people, huh? Nobody ever says that.
Quality Tester says Obama was a terrible president in retrospect. Drag him, no sympathy, only dragging.
Only dragging. I mean, but I mean, I'm not that type of person. I try to look at the entire situation, like I know he was bad in a lot of things. I know he was good in some others. Now, was it great? No. Did he have a lot of pressure with race stuff? Yeah. Oh, fuck yes. Yeah. And because he was the first black president, that's a big thing being in and of itself, let alone all the baggage that comes with that. Knowing that, you will be failing the black community at large, but then also realizing that people in his party is giving him a lot of pressure to not to fail his the community. I mean, it's a huge complex issue. That was he a bad president? Yeah, he wasn't good. He wasn't a great president at all. And I think that he should have done more in his second term. And the fact that he didn't is a failure of his presidency and should be noted, because he wasn't going to be running for anything after that. He knew that was his last term. He knew he could have pushed for healthcare for everybody at that point. But he didn't.
Reform.
Yeah. He
did
criminal
try.
justice reform, real financial reform. But everything was weak. And so what did the Republicans do? As soon as they got into office, as soon as they got a president, they dismantled fucking everything, or are in the process of doing so, because that's how open the door he left it for them. And he should have not done that. That's the failure of his presidency, was him not utilizing that second term to assure the things that he had promised.
Well, I think he should have hit the ground running with the progressive ideas that he had right away. Yeah. Instead, like, something that I think people discount is he spent the majority of his first term fixing the issues that we had gone through, and thought, if I do a good job in this term, then people are going to vote for Democrats. We'll keep power. And that didn't happen.
Right.
And so by the time the economy was coming back, he no longer had a Congress that would work with him.
Right. Because that shit takes time too. Yeah. I think people forget that, like, he inherited a really shitty ass economy.
Yeah.
People forget that, and that he was focusing on that too. And so that's a lot of fucking work that, I mean, he isn't getting any benefit of. Nobody's mentioning that, like, he did help in that sector. Now, did he reinstate Glass-Steagall? No. Should he have? Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I think of Obama as Obama was an okay president. He was better than Bush. if we didn't have Bush and we just had two Trumps like smacked together, he would have been an amazing, oh my God, he was the greatest thing ever. If you had that kind of thing back to back. But he was okay, and he did do some good things, but there was a lot of things that he could have done a lot better.
And that's what I'm saying. Like his second term, he could have done way better because that pressure wasn't there anymore for him to get reelected. But I think it was the Clintonism mentality. Clinton knew she was going to run and needed the presidency to mimic something that she would run on, right? Or that she would do. And so he couldn't go back to his radicalism because of that restriction and because of the Democratic Party saying like, well, we're going to have our anointed queen come in and do these things. And it's going to be like this, like your first term presidency. It's going to go back to the Clinton era. Everybody's going to be happy about that. We're going to reduce the deficit even more by cutting welfare, whatever, like Clinton did.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he was limited. His hands were tied in that regard, but should he have listened? No. Because surprise, nobody wanted Clinton.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I'm completely happy if we get the appropriate representation in the state, but I still think that the one thing that we do need to push for is pretty much the radicalization of the unions and pretty much the grassroots getting together the communities and finally getting the means of production in the hands of the workers from that aspect. But I mean, if we get people in office that facilitate that process, that's great. But I think that the true power comes from the people on the ground.
From the ground up, yeah.
Definitely.
I agree.
Because nobody's going to end up, because nobody at the top that's super comfortable right now, right? Nobody's going to want to rock the boat or change the system.
Yeah.
It's always going to have to come from the bottom up.
Yeah,
I mean,
it benefits way too much to make any changes.
As far as president, I'll vote for a shoe as opposed to Trump, but I hope we
Yeah.
get someone good.
Unfortunately, yeah.
I want to vote for the shoe that was thrown at George Bush.
Right? Yeah. Or this, I want to vote for the man that threw the shoe.
Hell yeah.
Quality Tester just said the presidency with Amanda is over. Chairman Busativity is now my president.
That's too funny.
Hey, at least I can put it on my resume.
It's true, though.
Unfortunately, I hate to do this, but I actually have to get off of here because I got to go to bed for work tomorrow. But
yeah,
oh my God, it's 10 o'clock already.
It is. This has gone really fast.
Yeah.
I want more of this. So
yes.
I didn't actually.
Back on.
I actually didn't get through all the points that I wanted to talk about, so we probably should do this another time.
Yeah, for sure.
It's funny. Like I had all these points planned out, but then the conversation got away from me, and you guys just carried this entire thing the entire time. Thank you.
You thought this was going to get boring, that there was going to be dead moments in the conversation.
No, this is awesome. This is perfect. Thank you guys. Yes, and thank you for all who came to watch us. I appreciate this very much, being a small channel. Thank you for sticking around, especially Quality Tester, who's been for the past I don't know how long the only person in the chat. Just I've definitely appreciated your input, Quality Tester.
I want Quality Tester in my chat. I hope Quality Tester subscribes to my channel, because Quality Tester has been fact checking and tossing out links all night long. And that
also
was awesome.
Thank you, Wonder Lady. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, JJ Stinkman. I'm just going to keep saying thank you for anybody who posts something. But yeah, if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, you should check that out. If you haven't subscribed, oh, Amanda's got her scary face up.
That is very uncanny valley. Oh my god.
Subscribe to Brief Brain Facts. Subscribe to Godless Iowan. Subscribe to Mrs. Snarky. I'm sorry, I said that funny with a really nasally voice. But anyway.
No worries.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. Really.
Oh, it's definitely been my pleasure, and I want this to happen again as well because I really enjoyed this. The time just flew by.
And hell yeah, Quality Tester subscribe to my channel. So thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, woot!
All right, and also don't forget Patreon and PayPal. It's not a necessity, but I would definitely appreciate it. I could use the extra income. And do you guys have any other links that you would like to mention to the people in the chat?
I have a Patreon. Snarky has a Patreon. We all have Patreons. We all need money. Give us your money.
Oh.
Can you make sure that you put our YouTube links and stuff in your description box below?
Oh, you know what? I haven't done that, but I should do that. Hold on.
Yeah,
That's
and
what I would do too.
all my Patreon and stuff like that is in the descriptions of my videos. So
okay, I think Aaron posted all the links anyway earlier in the chat, but I probably should edit the description and do that right now.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Anyway, see you guys later.
Good night, y'all. Bye.
And I am doing this all wrong. Oh, stop broadcast. Okay, goodbye.